Thank you, Tanya. The next speaker is Karen Coyle. She's a librarian with over 30 years of experience with library technology. She now consults in a variety of areas relating to digital libraries. She's published dozens of articles and reports, most available on her website. She has served on standards committees, including the MARC Standards Group, NISO AX for the Open URL standard, and was an ALA representative to the ebook standards development. She follows, writes, and speaks on a wide range of policy areas, including intellectual property, privacy, and public access to information. As a consultant, she works primarily on metadata development and technology planning. She is currently investigating the possibilities offered by the semantic web and linked data technology. Her topic is Rethinking FRBR 2 decades on.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to choose a topic that isn't directly about catalogs and cataloging. I also want to thank the U.S. Embassy for sponsoring my way here, although when I went to visit them yesterday, they took away my computer, my cell phone, this thumb drive, and even my earbuds before I could enter. So I was just sort of felt lucky I could keep my clothes on, and they did give it all back. But it's very hard to have all of your electronic items taken away from you, let me tell you. 20 years on, what do we mean by that? Well, that's kind of a fudge, because the first drafts of FRBR actually came out between 1994 and 1996, but it has been in final draft since 1998. So this is not a new concept, really. It's something that's been around for quite a while. The stated goals of FRBR are ones that I think that many of us may have forgotten or never really encountered, which is that FRBR was intended to develop a framework for understanding the purposes of the bibliographic record. And the study group was supposed to recommend a basic level of functionality for national bibliographic records. This came out of an international meeting in Stockholm in 1990. They were supposed to develop a core level standard that would help libraries reduce cataloging costs and at the same time ensure that records meet user needs. FRBR was not a break with library tradition. It came out of the work that had already been happening in the 20th century, looking at levels of bibliographic abstraction, folks like Lubetzky, who was concerned about the work, Patrick Wilson's expansion of catalogs to the second kind of power, and of course the addition of the work in the form of the uniform title that happened in the Anglo-American cataloging rules. In addition, of course, there was the influence of Barbara Tillett's work on bibliographic relationships, especially because she was on both the FRBR committee and on the RDA committee. One of the things that I think it illustrates best what we mean when we talk about these bibliographic groupings are the bibliographic families of Patrick Wilson and his idea. Concepts begin with a progenitor, just like you have in a family, and the books become either reprinted, they become adapted, they become translated, and as each of these comes into being, the family grows. And this to me really illustrates Ranganathan's concept of the library as a growing organism. It doesn't just grow quantitatively. It grows qualitatively because every new addition to the library catalog adds new relationships. Now, you may wonder where we got the entity relation model in FRBR. That was actually a methodology for thinking about this problem that was required in the charge to the FRBR committee, the thing called the terms of reference. They were told to make use of ER modeling to think about the problem. ER modeling is derived from a database design technology, and it identifies things like identities and relationships and attributes, which is is exactly what we find in FRBR. However, as Barbara Tillett stated many times, FRBR is not a data model, it's not a metadata scheme, it is not a system design structure. It is a conceptual model of the bibliographic universe. And what do we mean by conceptual model? In ER modeling, there are various levels of modeling that you work through in order to get down to the actual point of being able to create a database. The conceptual model gives you your main entities and relationships. It's a very high-level model. It is not actionable. It cannot be turned into code. It is entirely independent of technology, and it's really a discussion document between the technical people and the subject experts. In order to make this actionable, you must work into a logical model, and that is much more detailed and takes quite a bit more work. That is where you decide what all of your data elements are, what the values will be, and then the physical model is what you actually implement in a database. FRBR is a conceptual model. Therefore, it is a high-level grouping of ideas and concepts that begin the discussion as to what your data really is. The results of the FRBR work were 142 pages of text. I defy anyone to claim that they've read all 142 pages. I think that would be very unusual. And 3 diagrams. And if you ask people about FRBR, what is it that they know about FRBR? They know these 3 diagrams. And even if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this is about 3 pages of those 142, okay? These do not tell you what the FRBR document says. However, we are human beings and we like to have pictures, and we like to have simple pictures that we can grasp at one look, and those provide this for us. But unfortunately, what has happened is that this has become FRBR for us, and I'm here to tell you that it's not quite it. So if you look at something like one of these high-level diagrams, and you think, what could it represent? You know, does this show you what you could do in a database? This is a logical database diagram. So that's the comparison between that top level and the next level down. This logical diagram is for something called Music Brains, which is a bibliographic database of music, mainly on CD. It does almost exactly what a library database based on music would do. It has works, it has performances, it connects all of those to the various CDs and to the performers, etc. So if you were to do a library database based on music, this is what you would need. The FRBR diagram would merely give you some high-level concepts. And I just want to say that for those of you who've looked at the RDA scenarios, the database scenarios, this is not a database design. This is basically the equivalent of one of those FRBR diagrams with a few more words in it, because this is a database design. I feel like I should be able to do the, you know, that's not a knife, this is a knife, right? You know, the Crocodile Dundee thing. But anyway, that is not a database diagram. One of the difficulties that I think we run into with the fact that there are these entity relation diagrams in FRBR is that most of us don't really know how to read an entity relation diagram. And this looks like a nice, you know, flow from, you know, work through expression manifestation item, and I think that most people envision this as being a kind of a hierarchical, you know, you've got one work, you've got multiple expressions. In fact, what that diagram says is this. It is not a hierarchy, this is what is called a network diagram. FRBR describes a network. And not only that, but those three pictures that we all know so well do not include all of the relationships. They do not include the work-to-work, expression-to-expression relationships, which would then add in some more complication. And were you to take only 2 or 3 works and start developing all of the connections between them, you would see that it is much more complex than the picture that you get looking at those few diagrams. So the entity relation diagram uses notation. You know, the arrows and things have a meaning. The notation that was used by the FRBR review group is this one on the left. It dates from about 1982. By the late 80s, the entity relation diagrams became much more complex. Not only complex, but they gave more information. So, for example, there is a lot that we don't know from those FRBR diagrams in terms of what the relationships mean. Today, most people doing diagramming use something called UML, the Universal Modeling Language, which has 14 different types of modeling notations. So I want to talk to you about FRBR as concepts, not as a diagram, not as a data design, but as concepts. And I want to talk about how, over the years, some people have interpreted these concepts, because, of course, concepts are open to interpretation. So I want to talk about alternative models, and I have chosen only models that do not come from the library world. So one of the strengths of a good conceptual model is that many different people can see it as useful in their environment, and that has definitely been the case with FRBR. One of the things that FRBR seems to be lacking, at least in this limited diagram, and something that bothers me terribly, is that there don't seem to be any actors, that the expression is embodied, the manifestation embodies the expression. So how can a manifestation do anything? It's an inanimate object, right? So there are a number of people who have added actors and actions into it and made it much more of an event and an active model. For example, music needs a number of actors that are very important. For example, because many expressions are performed and reperformed and reinterpreted. And the manifestation, which I find to be a particularly odd concept, is usually the action of a third party. So this idea that you go from work to expression to manifestation in some kind of direct line kind of makes you forget that in the middle of that, the publisher comes in and, you know, sort of takes it off in whatever direction that they want. So an example of a very event and action-oriented vision of FRBR is FRBR 00, FRBR object-oriented, which is a FRBRized version of the conceptual reference model done by the museum community. And I want you to note in here, once again, we're talking about conceptual models. FRBR 00 is object-oriented. That's what the 00 means, of course. Object-oriented almost by itself means that it uses classes and subclasses and that it is very event-oriented. There is an active coordination going on between the conceptual reference model of the museums and FRBR to try to make it so that that model can handle all kinds of bibliographic and intellectual object information. It adds many layers. It's interesting that FRBR has these 4 concepts that don't seem to be divisible, but as we'll see, many people see them as being upper-level concepts that should get sub-concepts. And something that's very important for museums is that FRBR 00 is able to handle both published and non-published works. This is one of the simpler parts of the FRBR diagram. It can get to be very difficult, but I want you to notice, if I can point to it here, is this going to point, that it has events. It has added events that happen. So it isn't just that magically the expression becomes a manifestation, but there are actual events, and then there are actors who create those events. It also, you may notice, has a number of different kinds of works. So work becomes an upper class that has subclasses like individual work, publication work, recording work. One of the things that this does is it allows FRBR to handle performing arts, which are very complex, with a lot of different performances that become expressions on their own and parts of works. And I know that, for example, that the film librarians and archivists have a real need to be able to express all the different parts of the art that they catalog. Another much simpler and practically earlier event-oriented version, you may have run into Index many, many years ago, that it was essentially it was essentially a commercial model that took publication from beginning through end down to sales, and it is quite event-oriented, but they also have shown that they can make use of the FRBR concepts. And if you look here, that was the wrong button. If you look, give me the right button. If you look here, you see that we have abstraction, which is work, expression, manifestation, and item. But you also have here event. An event is very important. An event has a place, and it has a time, and it has a party who is the one that who is the actor that makes the event happen. So that is another way of looking at FRBR and fitting it into an event-oriented model. There are also people who have reinterpreted content and carrier. A professor in Japan, professor of library science, Shoichi Taniguchi, has done some very interesting work about FRBR. And his concept is that the expression level should have everything in it that has anything to do with the content of the item. And so he moves things like title proper, statement of responsibility, date of publication. All of those to him are part of the expression. And the manifestation is only the carrier information. And in his view, for the users, this expression view is where they would stop. If you ask a user about a book that they read, they're going to tell you they'll tell you the title, they'll tell you the author. They will almost never say it was published in London and had 356 pages. And so he divides it that way, in the way that the users do. Another interesting look at FRBR comes out of something called the Semantic Publishing and Referencing Model, which is SPAR. And SPAR is academically oriented, mostly print publications, and it takes the academic workflow from the first draft of a document to being sent for review, to getting back from review, to being published, and later on to being cited. So it has that entire workflow. Within that, one of the models is Fabio. I love the name. The FRBR-aligned bibliographic ontology. So this is where, of the models, of the modules that they have, this is where they do the bibliographic description. And it takes a very different view from what the library view of FRBR is. It treats WEMI, it treats Group 1, mainly as classes, and the subclasses help them type their materials. And again, they treat the manifestation only as physical description. So this is work and expression in Fabio. Very different from anything that any of us has ever thought of when encountering FRBR. So basically, work is types of works, which is like a review or an edition, and expressions are, manuscripts, periodical volume, that type of thing. I haven't been able to make sense of how this was divided up, but clearly it makes sense to the people who developed it, and so I have to assume that there's logic in here. And then the manifestation is simply physical. It's either analog, digital, or it's a collection. This is what a sort of a fragment of what a Fabio record looks like. And you can see that they're using FRBR to classify their materials, to put them into categories that are meaningful for them. So that is how they interpreted the FRBR concepts, which I find really fascinating. Now, if you look at the way they divide up their universe and look at it in terms of works, expressions, and manifestations, they very much follow the same idea that Taniguchi did, which is, the work is abstract. The expression has essentially all of the bibliographic information. And the manifestation is limited to telling you really what the physical format is. And in their environment, in the academic environment, where things, especially articles, get published in a lot of different physical formats. They come out in the journal, and then they come out as a PDF, and they can, be on many different websites. This then makes sense. So for them, the manifestation is going and getting the actual thing. I want to talk briefly about FRBR Core. And that's because many of the things I just spoke about are based on something called FRBR Core. FRBR Core was the first development of FRBR in RDF. It was developed in 2005 by two people who had nothing to do with libraries. They were linked data semantic web experts, Ian Davis and Richard Newman. It covers only the entities, which would be classes in RDF, and the relationships between the entities, but that includes all of the work, expression relationships, not just the main relationships. It does not include the attributes. So it allows you, if you want to create an RDF model that has some bibliographic meaning and you want to make use of FRBR, it allows you to do that without constraining you to certain descriptive data elements, that you can use the concepts as concepts. It is the basis for Fabio. It's the basis for the scholarly works application profile that I haven't shown you because there wasn't really enough time. It's used by the Europeana data model and by many others. If you look on the linked data cloud and you look at the statistics that are available from the linked open vocabularies, there are over 30 million uses of FRBR Core already in the linked data cloud. So FRBR is a concept and an important concept in the linked data world, but it's not the FRBR that you and I know. I thought I should mention BibFrame. I'm not going to talk about it much, but just in relation to this, because many people wonder about BibFrame. When BibFrame was first introduced, one of the first reactions was, well, it isn't FRBR. It isn't FRBR because it only has 2 bibliographic entities. It doesn't have 4. If you're doing FRBR, you have to have 4 bibliographic entities. Well, that's absolutely not true. Those are concepts, and that is not a record design. That is not a record structure. There is no reason why you have to have work, expression, manifestation, and item as your records. you can include the concepts in whatever structure you wish. And in BibFrame, they decided that they would use a two-level structure, that in general, the work covers both work and expression, and the instance manifestation. And if you've followed BibFrame, you know that we still don't know where item is going to go. That one's still being discussed. The BibFrame people have announced that they will be able to handle data that comes in with FRBR concepts as well as RDA. So again, if you think of FRBR as concepts and not as a structure, and it's not a structure, then you can see how something like this could very well be take in FRBRized data. RDA, I'm going to say even less about RDA because Gordon's going to speak about that. But just to say that the rules were organized around the FRBR concepts. RDA, again, if you read the comments, the statements coming out from those who worked on RDA, it is record and data store neutral. It is conceptual. So just a quick summary. FRBR is a conceptual model that can be interpreted and integrated. It can be classed and subclassed. We should actually be working to try to figure out what we can do with those concepts within a lot of different environments. What I haven't included here is that there are equally as many different interpretations in the non-books area within libraries. I'll give you my website, but I'm working on a paper that's so long no one will read it about all of these different concepts, but I'm also doing a few, trying to get a few ideas out in blog posts. FRBR is a network. It's not a tree structure. It works really quite well if you think of it in terms of linked data, as has been spoken of here. It may be lacking, but you could add actors and actions. It could become much more action and event-oriented. You could separate content and carrier differently to the way you do now. And if nothing else, by seeing how others have used FRBR and knowing that these are people we're going to want to exchange information with, I think that at this point we should understand the great need for flexibility in how we interpret it. So I thank you very much. That's my website, and I'll try to have links for all of this on there as soon as possible. Thank you.